Peter Levine, who is a research professor and Lincoln Phelan Professor of Citizenship of Public Affairs in Tufts University. Jonathan Tisch College, it's a very long title. From 2001, 2006, he was the founding deputy director, and then the second director until now of CIRCLE, the Center of Information and Research on Civil Learning and Engagement. Tenemos también otros componentes de la mesa que van a ser comentaristas. Vamos a dar 10 minutos a cada comentarista, 25 minutes to dissertation. Rudolfo Paramio, a mi izquierda, que ya lo conocéis y por lo tanto bienvenido aquí. No quería presentarlo más allá de decir que es lógicamente un profesor investigador del CSIC, pero bueno, sobre todo un buen amigo del instituto y una eminencia en los temas de ciencias políticas. Wolfgang Merkel holds a BA of Political Science and International Relations from Heidelberg and Bologna. Since 2004, he has been the director of Department of Democracy in the Center of Research in Social Science of Berlin. Y por último, Cecilia Güemes, que es PhD in Political Science por la Universidad Complutense.
My background is actually as a political philosopher, so I could have, philosophized about youth disaffection in politics and asked the normative questions. Is this good that people are disaffected with politics? What should the attitudes of citizens be towards politics? Should they like politics? Should they be distrustful? Jürgen Habermas has very interesting things to say about how we should be distrustful, actually, of politics. Or I could have asked the conceptual questions: what is disaffection, and what's the difference between disaffection and trust, and what, et cetera. But it struck me that the question really had a huge empirical component to it, a matter of fact, really. Because when you write about youth disaffection about politics in the United States, you really are implying young people are disaffected from politics in the United States, meaning something like a whole lot of them are disaffected in certain ways. And you're saying youth, that means that you think there's something distinctive about them, that they're specially disaffected. And probably you're trying to say something about the future, because when young people have a certain character, since they are the future, we worry about the next we worry about the next 80 years. So if you say youth disaffection in politics, you really mean what's going to happen to politics in the next 50 years as these young people grow older. So it did seem to me kind of important to look at whether young people were disaffected with politics or from politics, and how disaffected they were, and whether they disagreed with older people. So I just looked at a lot of survey data. And actually the whole paper really revolves around a set of graphs. So I'm going to go over there and show you the graphs, and then I'm looking forward to discussing. But in many ways, this is a very empirical question. Empirical paper. Sorry, was it already open? Yeah. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So one conceptual point, though. Whenever we talk about a population and we notice differences by age, we really should try to decide whether those, or investigate whether those differences are generational effects, age effects, or historical effects. This is sociology. I'm not a sociologist, but it's a valuable distinction. So, to take a generation effect, the most famous one is World War I, in Europe and North America too. Well, anybody who was young enough to be in World War I, or a woman who was young enough to be in a generation that was drafted into World War I, was permanently affected by that. They wore different clothes, they cut their hair differently, and they had very different politics from the generations that preceded them. And that is one of many explanations for the rest of the 20th century, because those First World War veterans, people like Adolf Hitler and many others, ended up running Europe in 1935, 1945. So that's a generational effect. There's something profound that happens to them when they are young. It lasts. Of course, it lasts in different ways. I mean, Churchill, Hitler, they were different. Well, Churchill's too old. But anyway, individuals are different from each other, but there was such a thing as a First World War generation. An age effect is different. Young people like risks and adventure and romance. Middle-aged people like me worry about our children. That's not something new. That is an important difference, but it happens in every generation. And it doesn't suggest anything about the future because I will get older and the young people will get older and we will reproduce. But there are important differences in each moment by age. And then a historical effect is something that happens to everybody at the same time. So communism falls and, Soviet communism falls and people change their views about communism, I assume, in countries like Spain and Britain and the United States. It's not an age effect or a generation effect, it's an effect of what's happened in history. So if you notice that young people are disaffected from politics, you have to ask, is this something special about them as a generation, in which case it will likely last for at least a while? Is it something about their being young, in which case perhaps it's always the case and the next 10 years they'll just get less disaffected? Or is it a historical effect? Are we all disaffected from politics? And I would say, as a quick framing comment, Americans, because I was asked to talk about the United States, are disaffected from politics. I mean, politics has a bad name. Americans don't like politicians. And government is not very popular and has never been. And as you well know, the United States has more classical liberal or neoliberal policies, partly because a lot of people don't really like government. But the question is whether the low levels of enthusiasm for politics or interest in politics and government by young people today are a generational effect, an age effect, or a historical effect. And I would say on the whole that youth are actually not particularly disaffected. They are not particularly disaffected in the United States. I'll show you a lot of different graphs, and they will be different stories. And in some ways, they are a bit disaffected. But on the whole, I don't see evidence of youth disaffection from politics in the sense of a generational effect or an age effect. I find young people generally about the same as older people, and in some important cases, actually more positive about politics and more positive about government than older generations are right now. The last thing I'll come to at the end of the talk is to say, I actually think the discussion of generations, which is very popular in the media as well as academia in America, talk about the young people today, is misleading and obscuring. Because there really is a critical phenomenon of great importance, which is inequality. And Wolfgang said exactly the same thing about Europe and probably mentioned the United States in passing too. But the real issue in the United States is not that people are disaffected or not disaffected. It's that some people are participating and other people are not participating. And the people who are participating are more privileged, wealthier, better educated than the people who aren't. And that's not a new thing. That's actually remarkably persistent and stubborn. So what we see mainly is the reproduction, the very efficient and quite impressive reproduction of political inequality each decade, decade after decade. When we talk about young people, we hide that because youth is an aggregate, and so we actually miss, and sometimes I wonder if maybe almost intentionally miss, what seems to me is really important, which is the stubborn inequality. So the graphs will go relatively quickly, but I hope they'll be interesting. The first two are from Europe, and they're partly to illustrate how to think about this with generation, age, or historical effects, but also to give a little context. And these are from the European Social Survey, so they only go back, as far as I could tell, to 2002. This question is, do you trust politicians? And I'm showing, as I will show for all the other graphs, the trend over time for people of different generations, so their birth year. So that the line that's labeled 1900 to 1950 is people who were born between 1900 and 1950, and it shows their change over time. If you look at this, I would say you see no, in my opinion, you see no generation or age effects of any importance. The different generations are very similar. In fact, the oldest and the youngest are right on the same line for a while. It's not a story about generations. There is a bit of a historical effect. This is only 10 years, but it looks as if for the last 10 years people have gotten somewhat less likely to trust politicians. I understand why. But this is an example of looking at the data and discovering there's not an age effect. This is a bit different because this is, are you interested in politics? Are you interested in politics? And I'm showing those who say not at all. So this is a measure of disaffection of a kind. And it is true here that the youngest group born after 1983 has been saying that they're the least interested. Their line sort of parallels everyone else, but they have been saying they're less interested. So that could be a bit of a generation effect, because even as they've gotten older over this time, they've remained more disaffected than the earlier generations. It would be much more interesting to be able to see this over a much longer period. But it does look as if there's something of a problem of youth disaffection from politics in Europe. But all the rest of my slides are from the United States. This is actually the same question almost. Are you very interested in politics? And this particular graph, I only have 4 years. It just only asks 4 times. I'll tell you, on all the American graphs, I'm showing 5 generations. Each one is of 20 years duration. And these are sort of American slang terminology for the generations, the boomers being the baby boom who were born right at the end of World War II. Generation X being my generation, which follows them. Millennials being those who were young around 2000. The greatest generation is so called because they are supposed to have won World War II and restored the economy. So, but you know, what you see here is a different pattern from Europe. First of all, you see you see much lower levels of interest, although the question's not exactly comparable. These are low levels of interest, but you see a rather rapid increase. This is only 4 years, but I'm pretty sure this is correct based on other evidence. That is, the last 10 years have been politically intense in the United States. The Obama years, 2 wars, quite a lot has been going on. More people are interested than were previously. I don't think there's an age effect here at all. Those are the 5 generations shown on the same graph, and they are all going along exactly the same. This is another kind of affection or disaffection. This is, do you have confidence in Congress to do the right thing? And I'm showing you now kind of a long time series, which I'm always happier to do, 1973 all the way to 2014. And you can see in general that confidence has tended to fall, although I think it's very important that it's gone up and down, because it seems to me that this is mainly a historical effect. If you wanted to explain the trend, you would mainly say, well, look at the performance of Congress at that time. Maybe not, in my opinion, the performance, but the behavior of Congress seems to correlate with what people think of it. So, certainly confidence in Congress is higher in the late 1980s, and then falls down in the 1990s when there's, especially in the early 1990s when there's a lot of problems in Congress. In fact, the parties switch. And then it rises, and then it falls again. And I think you could explain it in terms of events. On the whole, I don't see much evidence that age matters. It didn't matter at all from 1973 to 1987. All the different generations are exactly the same. Generation X, my generation, comes in to becomes old enough to vote, more confident in Congress than other people. But then as we get a bit more older and more wise, perhaps we fall off and join everybody else. And right now, the millennials, this youngest generation, are doing the same thing that we did when we were young. So they are actually the most confident in Congress, although it's falling fast. So if you took a snapshot right now, you would say, who's disaffected from politics? The boomers. Who's least disaffected from politics? The millennials. But looking at a little bit longer time frame, I would say it's not an age thing. People seem to have similar views. It also goes up and down a lot, so it's not some long-term trend. I would expect confidence to go back up again if Congress could actually do a good job, which they have not been doing lately. And that's not just my opinion. Everybody thinks they've been doing a terrible job. If they start doing a better job, you'd see some recovery. Here's a different kind of question. Do you agree I have a say in what government does? So this is a sense of what political scientists call efficacy, external efficacy. I have a say. Government listens to me. It's only been asked since 1996. It's interesting. It's for the population as a whole, it's less than half, but it's not too bad. It's around 40% or better. I would say the different generations are not very different in general. I mean, it doesn't look like a generational effect. Everybody seems to be about the same, except the millennials did fall off in 2014 a lot. So they're the least likely to have a say, to think that government has a say. That's interesting. I would note it's only 1 year. And I think we need to wait to see. 2014 was a year when the Republicans did very well in Congress, in the congressional elections. Young people, however, preferred the Democrats. So I can imagine that they just were despondent in the fall of 2014 when they saw their side was going to lose. I can't prove that, but that before we jump to any great conclusions about their sense of disaffection, we should wait another year or two. Although it is true that in 2014, millennials really did not feel they had a say. So that is important. This is more ideology. So this is a different definition of disaffection, this is the question of whether you think the government is an instrument, ought to be an instrument for social change. The question is, it's a more complicated survey question, but basically it is, do you think that the government should do more to address problems, or do you think it should do less? So the classical liberal, neoliberal, what we call conservative person says should do less, and the progressive democratic socialist person says it should do more. On the whole, I don't think you see a very big generational pattern here. I think you see an interesting U in the whole country, which is what we call, the post-1980s, followed by the recent possible shift somewhat to the left, which at least explains Obama's election and could explain some changes in the future. It is true the millennials are, so far, the most enthusiastic about government doing more, which also makes good sense because they voted overwhelmingly for Obama in 2008 and 2012 as well. It's too soon to tell because if you look back at the other lines, they squiggle up and down, and the millennials could change. But at this moment, if disaffection from politics means you don't like government, then I think you would say that most of the boomers, at least of the millennials. Government is kind of a broad category. Governments do lots of things. They spy on your cell phone, and they invade other countries, and they spend money. So it's worth looking at different things. This is the question of, do you think as a country we spend too little on education? And that really means, does the government spend too little on education? So one thing to note, just to complicate your stereotypes about Americans, is Americans actually believe we should spend more on education. Education is popular, very popular, always. There is an interesting generational pattern if you go back to the beginning of this series, 1973 to 1980, when the older generation born before 1926 is still numerous in the population. There's this pattern there that I think each generation really is more supportive of education. And that I would guess is an example of modernization, of the global phenomenon of modernization. I mean, as the economy is becoming more complex, there are greater demands on workers to have advanced skills, and each generation is realizing that and supporting more education. However, since 1994, it really hasn't been that much of a generational pattern. The Xers and the boomers are about the same. And the millennials actually started just a little bit lower, but they're catching up. So I think what I would say here is that Americans believe we should spend more on education. Millennials are just in the same category. It's interesting, though, because you might think they would be the ones who really want to spend more on education because they're still young enough to get education. I can't remember if I show this. I don't. So you can also look at opinions about Social Security, which is the name of the federal government's retirement program. So it's only for old people. And interestingly, millennials are also very strongly supportive of that. So I don't think this is just about what I get. It's about ideology. This is the question about spending money on welfare, which just the word means money for poor people, whether it's for food or for housing or unemployment insurance for poor people. And I switched the graph because I thought it was more interesting. So this is we spend too much on welfare. So the more conservative or classical liberal, neoliberal view is up, and the more progressive left view is down. There's one interesting generational difference. The old folks, those born before 1926, they were supported welfare. This was a generation born before Franklin Roosevelt and the Great Recession, the Great Depression, and they supported welfare. They thought there should be more of it. They're only gone from the map because there's not that many of them. Everybody else has been just about exactly the same, but there are big changes over time. So this is a perfect example of a historical effect. There's a lot of up and down. Actually, it's very interesting because it's pretty close to 50%, a little bit below. So this is a topic on which national elections are fought and competed. You can win an election by saying we should spend more, or you can win an election by saying we should spend less. Depends on the election. And I think you could explain, for example, people saying we spend too much on welfare in the 1970s as a result of a general sense that we spent too much on welfare. I don't necessarily agree, but 1980 is when Reagan is elected saying we spend too much on welfare. And then once he's elected and he cuts welfare, fewer people think we spend too much money on welfare. Few more slides, and they are sort of more about my role in the politics rather than politics. So these are questions, they're value questions about how you think about yourself in politics. And the first one is, I think it is very important to understand other people's reasoning. So this is a measure of deliberation, of deliberative values. Do you think that you should understand how other people think? And there is it's only 2 years, so that's sad, because who knows what happened in between. But, not enough data. But it is interesting. The millennials who are marked only by the X, because they appear then, they're the ones who think it's most important to understand other people's reasoning. The Xers, that's my generation, we started low, but we've gotten a bit more mature. And the other two generations have fallen. But here's a different question which worries me a bit. This is the principle. You're asked your opinion about the principle. Is it very important that people have a chance to participate in decisions that affect them? So that's, I would say, a support for a kind of participatory democracy, or just a democracy, democratic value. And I'm sorry to say that the millennials coming on just at the end there are the least supportive of that principle. So it's too early to tell if that's really a problem. It's only 1 year, but a little worrying that they're not as enthusiastic about it. So they want to listen. That's the deliberative impulse, but they don't necessarily want to make a decision or have the power to make a decision. So now this is a different graph in terms of the way it's organized. This is voter turnout. This is the percentage of people who vote in presidential years. And I'm only showing two generations, the baby boom and the millennials. And I'm showing them, at the bottom it says, on the horizontal axis, it doesn't say the year, it says which election in your life. So the first election for the millennials is 2008. The first election for the boomers is 1972. And I show it because the boomers started pretty bad turnout and have gradually gotten generally better. And there's a very strong pattern in the US where our turnout is terrible, as Wolfgang correctly noted, for people to get more likely to vote as they go through life. Voting becomes habitual. So the millennials start low, much concerned that they're low, but I note that they started just about the same place the boomers did, and I would suspect that they will increase as well as the life. So this is a perfect example of an age effect, not a generation effect. It appears in the United States, voting is something you do as you get older, just as riding a motorcycle is something you do less as you get older. Two more. This is a great example, because we've talked a little about the media. This is a great example of a generation effect. This is a question of how you engage with news and politics. And to be sure, newspapers are changing and a new media environment is developing. But this is the question, do you read the newspaper every day? And back in 1972, if you asked an old American, not so old then, 50 or 60 years old, did they read a newspaper? Almost 80% said yes every day. If you ask a millennial right now, do you read the daily newspaper, about 8% say yes. And you see how generational that is. Each generation is different. Each generation stays the same its whole life course. A little bit of decline lately, but mostly these are just different generations. So this means that the daily newspaper in the United States is doomed. I would say it's dead, because as these generations get older, as they go through life, the market is just going to collapse. And so we either are going to get a new news media environment that somehow continues to serve the public need for information, or we have a big problem. But the old media market is dying. But it's interesting because it differs from this opinion question. Do you trust reporters? I can't remember how the question is asked, but are you trusting in the news? And that's a decline, to be sure, slow, gradual, long-term decline, not generational at all. And in fact, the millennials are the most trusting right now of the press, even though they're least likely to read it. So those are all my slides. I just want to reinforce that final point that I made about inequality. I did what I was asked to do, which was to write about youth. I'm happy to do it. It was fun. But because I was asked to write about youth, I looked only at changes for whole generations over time. That obscures, and I won't show any slides, but that obscures the really big differences. So when you're talking about younger people, the way to think about class is mainly in terms of whether they're going to higher education. Because you can't tell how much money they have because they're young and they don't know how much money they'll have later. But about half, a little bit less than half of Americans go to higher education. No, a little bit more than half, 53%. And 47% don't go. And that's really the difference between the middle class and the working class. And if you looked at any of these graphs, you would see gigantic differences between the middle class and the working class, so defined. But just to take one example, voting. The voter turnout rate is about twice as high for those who vote, as those who go to college as for those who don't. So that pattern is completely unchanged over time, and the whole voter turnout rate is quite flat over time since 1972. But the difference by whether you're middle class or working class is huge. So I think I'm glad to have written about youth disaffection. I don't think it's our problem. I think our problem is a remarkably persistent process of reproducing political voice in the United States. My last sentence is, it's really a remarkable persistence, because think of how much else has changed. The whole world has changed. Media, politics, the issues, the candidates, demographics. We'll soon have a majority people of color in the United States, and yet the voter turnout rate is flat. So somehow we met, and it's always correlated with education and income. So somehow we always manage to get the same people to participate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your excellent presentation. Now we continue with the panelists. Rodolfo.
Ante todo, muchas gracias a Peter por la exposición y después yo querría plantear las dudas y los espacios de investigación que se me abren a la vista de esa exposición. Primero, ¿qué relación existiría dentro de cada generación, y en particular de los millennials, entre los niveles de información política, educación y, en último término, recursos? Es decir, ¿qué cabría hacer alguna distinción en términos de clase o vinculados a la clase social entre las actitudes de esta generación más reciente en relación particularmente con las preguntas sobre apoyo a la educación, apoyo al welfare y, en general, las políticas pro Estado o contra intervención del Estado? Es decir, ¿existe algo así como una brecha en términos sociales entre la generación más joven y la polarización política que parece que han traducido las últimas elecciones, en particular las simpatías por el Tea Party o la movilización en torno a las consignas del Tea Party y las políticas, digamos, en torno al programa o la agenda de Obama. ¿Existe eso? ¿O se podría tratar de saber eso? Segundo, los orígenes étnicos. Tenemos la impresión de que los electores, digamos, afroamericanos están muy cerca de los niveles de participación de los blancos, cosa que no es evidente que tenga relación con niveles de educación y de recursos. Y la gran incógnita que suponen los electores, digamos, latinos, de los que no sabemos cómo van a evolucionar. Es decir, porque tenemos la sensación de que por valores sociales son más conservadores, mientras que puede que en términos de participación política o de actuación del Estado sean más progresistas o estén más cercanos a la agenda, digamos, demócrata. Bueno, son las preguntas que se me abren y, en particular, la primera me crea gran curiosidad porque tendría que ver con lo que se percibe con una cierta polarización política, la capacidad del Tea Party para bloquear la adaptabilidad del Partido Republicano a circunstancias cambiantes, el poder de veto, digamos, de los electores del Tea Party y la agenda de reformas que casi todo el mundo admite que necesita Estados Unidos, aunque solo sea en términos de inversión en infraestructuras, que es una cosa bastante obvia y a la que, sin embargo, el Partido Republicano no ha sido capaz de, digamos, de adaptarse. Son, digamos, cuestiones abiertas y, una vez más, gracias a Peter y, por supuesto, a las instituciones responsables. Gracias.
Wolfgang, please.
Peter, I subsume my comments under three major points. The one, to simplify your main messages.
Oh, turn here a little.
Sorry. The first one, to simplify your main messages. In order to answer the second one, are these messages consistent with each other? And the third point is, where do I think you have missing points, and where could you strengthen your argument also with regard to our general aim of publication? The main messages I find quite convincing. So disaffection of youth is not a particular phenomenon in the US. It would be interesting here for me to look how it works with if we distinguish between conventional participation and non-conventional participation. Because what we know from Europe, it's very often that youth can be disappointed and is in many countries disappointed with normal conventional politics, but engages in non-conventional forms, manifestation, NGOs, and so forth. I think this is something we all should look somehow deeper in. Then you mention, by some measures, youth is can be even the least disaffected. I come back to this point because I don't think it is really supported by all your data you are presenting. What I find quite interesting, this is related then to democracy as a system as a whole. There is a decline of trust vis-à-vis politicians, and you are completely correct if you are arguing with Habermas. Democracy entails, so to say, by its constitutional elements, that those who are governed should be critical, should not have too much trust in those they govern. So here, again, we should not be too positivistic with a survey question. Then the US citizens, they are skeptical against political interference in general, very convincing that point. But then 2004, all generation demand a stronger role for government, if I read it and if I have listened correctly. What does this mean? Does it mean be observing a kind of end of the neoliberal cycle, that people get disappointed with lean government, so to say? Or maybe this is only my optimistic expectation I'm bringing back in here. Consistency of one major point, which is also quite interesting if you compare it with Europe. Social security is popular, meaning pension, health, and so forth, welfare not. We don't really distinguish in Europe between the two. And this is what, if you do it in the moment, if you really distinguish between welfare and social security, there is an implicit discourse behind. And the implicit discourse means welfare is for the non-deserving people. Right. And the other one is on a meritocratic base. And this makes it very much problematic in the United States to call for a more active role of government. Then the consistencies of your findings. There is, in figure 4, you are arguing confidence, and you don't say really in Congress, but in congressmen. Yeah. There is a difference, and I would very much pledge that we distinguish between at least 3 levels, because this is of relevance for the working of democracy and the legitimacy of democracy. The first level are the politicians. The second level are institutions. And the third level is the idea of democracy. And if we have, for example, disaffection on the first level, it may not really be dramatic, because here democracy has institutions, has feedback cycles which are part of democracy. It becomes more problematic if it affects really the institution of parliament, the institution of political parties as such, and so forth. You are arguing in this figure 4, the confidence in congressmen is falling steeply after 2004, but at the same time, interest in politics has increased. Where did the interest go? So it is increased, but they don't like the congressmen even less than they did in the past. The question 10, I'm also not sure whether we really can get out of this question what we want. The survey question asked, very important, that people have a chance to participate in decisions. The crux of the matter could be a chance to participate. If I would be a libertarian or a liberal, I would say, of course, they have. The Constitution provides it. This is what democracy is about. But what seems to me more important, if they actually use it. Right. And they use it only if they have the cognitive resources, I would argue. And this is something which becomes more and more important in times where the big collective organizations are eroding, where trade unions are going down, and the people do not believe in trade unions and into the interpretation of the world by political parties, so to say. Then they are, they have to rely back on their individual resources, and they are, these resources are unequally distributed, and this would make the principle of equality in democracy quite important. Some minor points about the missings. Tocqueville and Marx once argued the United States show the mirror of the future to the Europeans. And since we like to believe in both important thinkers, if we look to the extremely low electoral turnout in the United States, seen from the United States, do you think this is again the future for us Europeans as well? And strange enough that you have only comparable figures in Switzerland with the electoral participation to the US, but they have the referenda. But you have them in California to a large extent as well. The important question then is, and I'm not sure you may respond to it, the young people, does abstention become habitual? Or does voting rises with age? What do we know exactly from the past? The second one would be not so problematic, it's clear, but if it becomes really an habitus, what electoral researchers sometimes are arguing, then certainly it will be a problem for democracy. I have 2 or 3 more points. Very much I agree what you said, class matters. Class matters more than generations or age. I completely agree. This is what we see in Europe in an extremely clear fashion. What is quite interesting is what you have shown to us, the distrust in the press or the non-interest in reading. And I ask my students as well, and they said, newspapers, we don't read it. We go to our websites, we go to our platforms. And what one can observe is the following problem again. One can think about newspaper whatever you want, but there is a certain quality control simply by the public. If you read El País or Le Monde or even El Mundo, then you have a quality control. You have a control of the facts. You don't have it in the net. Very often there are conspiracy themes and so forth, and especially you have communities who are only relying on information which come out of their communities. So there is not bridging communication, bridging social capital, what we need. Last 2 questions, you say, you argue at one point, context matters for youth participation. Can you make it somehow clearer which contexts are particularly beneficial or detrimental to participation of the youth? Because if we know more about this, then we could even think about institutional reforms or engineering. And I end with a counterfactual question. How would government and policies change in the United States if some weird president, philosopher, king in the United States would then implement obligatory voting? Would it not dramatically change if it would have only European levels, say between 70 and 80%, having a stronger social inclusion? What would change in American and US democracy?
Thank you, Wolfgang. Now we continue. Cecilia, please.
Bueno, muchas gracias a los que nos invitaron, a Pedro, a Ludolfo y a Peter Levine por el paper. Tengo anotado en inglés los comentarios también. Vale. Bueno, en primer lugar, el paper me gustó mucho, está muy bien, y además una cosa que antes comentábamos, que tiene de valioso como paper, es que desmantela una hipótesis que está en el sentido común, digamos, de la ciudadanía, de la prensa, bueno. Y eso me parece muy interesante, que se pruebe y se publique y que se hable de hipótesis nulas. Digamos, comprobar muchas veces que hay un mito alrededor, por ejemplo, de los jóvenes, y que los jóvenes no serían menos o más, menos afectos o más desafectos que los otros grupos. Eso me ha gustado mucho y me gustaría destacarlo porque normalmente en la ciencia, cuando la hipótesis es nula, se abandona el trabajo, digamos, no se sigue. Y esto no nos muestra digamos, los puntos ciegos que tienen todas las investigaciones en ciencias sociales y que también deberían visibilizarse este tipo de trabajos. Luego, yendo más al texto y algunas ideas que estaban presentes a lo largo del texto, porque gran parte de las cosas que iba a decir ya las dijeron mis compañeros de mesa, hay una parte donde sugieres que las actitudes y las opiniones políticas tienen que ver con puntos de vista de los sujetos sobre el rol que tiene que tener el gobierno y no sobre cálculos sobre sus propias necesidades o intereses. Esto me parece interesante porque se conecta de alguna manera con la discusión sobre la naturaleza de la confianza social y política, y hay dos grandes corrientes en este sentido, unas que van por el lado del racionalismo, como Russell Hardin o James Coleman, digamos que van en línea más, bueno, es una cuestión cognitiva que analiza los signos, las señales, la información disponible, y en base a eso elabora una opinión, una actitud, que vendría a ser la confianza, y otra línea que tiene que ver más con Bo Rothstein o Eric Uslaner, digamos que hablan más de lo afectivo y de las experiencias que uno ha adquirido de joven y que van moldeando. Entonces, en ese sentido, ¿qué crees tú, digamos? Si esta es tu opinión, tiene que ver más con que es una cuestión afectiva, la actitud política se construye afectivamente, o más racional. O sea, y hay una idea bastante interesante de Bob Rothstein, del Instituto de Gotemburgo, sobre las memorias colectivas y los framing, cómo van configurando las ideas. Entonces, si crees que va en esa línea. Luego, bueno, totalmente de acuerdo con la conclusión final acerca de lo importante que es retomar la desigualdad para explicar la desafección y en estas cuestiones. Me recordó mucho a lo de Alejandro Portes, cuando discute con Robert Putnam, digamos, acerca del origen del capital social, y él tiene una opinión muy diferente. Robert Putnam sugiere que las diferencias étnicas hacen declinar al capital social, cuando Alejandro Portes le dice que en realidad la base está en la desigualdad. Y creo que en ese punto se tocan los dos trabajos, es decir, bueno, acá lo importante es volver a hablar de desigualdad económica, de clase, racial, y bueno, y eso me parece muy interesante. Luego, acaban las dos preguntas más grandes, digamos. Lo primero es, marcás una diferencia entre Europa y Estados Unidos. ¿A qué explicás esa diferencia? ¿Cuál sería tu hipótesis de por qué en Europa los jóvenes serían más desafectos que en Estados Unidos? ¿Tiene que ver con una cuestión cultural o estructural, a tu entender? Y lo mismo yo me lo pregunto para América Latina, digamos, cómo se comportan. Aparentemente, resultados que he visto y por modelos estadísticos y regresiones que estuvimos haciendo dentro del proyecto, la variable de la edad y de la juventud no sería relevante para explicar ni la menor satisfacción con la democracia ni la participación en protestas, que sería una acción política no convencional, como sugería el profesor anterior. Entonces, en América Latina la juventud no parece ser una clave explicativa, no parece ser una variable significativamente relacionada con estos fenómenos. Pero sí, hay una cosa interesante que sí tiene que ver con la juventud en un punto, que es cuán activo cibernéticamente seas. Es decir, las personas que son más activas en la red sí se correlacionan con las personas que más participan, que más interés político tienen. Eso es lo que salen los modelos estadísticos, al menos para América Latina. Bueno, y si eso se podría pensar en escenarios como en Estados Unidos, donde la brecha digital es mucho menor que lo que existe en América Latina, por ejemplo. Y luego hay una idea que también sugerís hacia el final, que decís que los jóvenes tendrían menos interés en participar políticamente. Y esto en algún punto no me casa con el boom que tuvo la idea de Obama del Open Government, digamos, que explotó a partir de Obama y luego se llevó a todos lados, digamos, y hoy está el Open Government Partnership y todas estas cuestiones, y los ejes del gobierno abierto, si bien están en Open Data y transparencia, tienen también un fuerte eje en participación. Y a mi entender, esto tuvo un eco muy importante en los jóvenes, digamos, y los que llevaron adelante esto son los jóvenes de Estados Unidos. Entonces, si bien, volviendo un poco a lo que decía el profesor anterior, digamos, quizás los jóvenes no están tan interesados en participar políticamente por canales tradicionales, pero sí participar en la gestión de lo público a través de otras vías. Por ejemplo, Estados Unidos siempre se lo cita, con esto de Obama, el desarrollo de las apps para cuestiones públicas y políticas. Entonces, quizás haya otras maneras de pensarlo. Y también quizás esta sea la razón por la que los millennials, me gustan mucho los clusters y los nombres que le diste a los clusters de grupo, especialmente el de Generación X, porque es una película que define muy bien esa generación. Quizás por esa razón te dé que son similares los comportamientos, pero en realidad no lo sé. Digo, el hecho de que tienen un interés pero diferente. Y bueno, nada más, muchas gracias.
Great. Thank you, Cecilia. I think, Peter, before open Q&A, you can respond in 5 minutes or 7 minutes.
No, you know, that's fine. All these things were so good, and they're interesting, and I suppose I have things to say about all of them, but that would be terrible, because we would be here for 45 minutes. I think I just, so I was really interested in everything everybody said, but I won't do justice to it. I think I'll say just a few things. I didn't talk about race because I was just talking about the whole generation, but in addition to distinguishing by class, we want to distinguish by race, for sure. And Ludolfo started that off by asking both about the interesting fact that African Americans have high voter turnout, but also wondering about differences in political views among millennials. Will, for example, the Tea Party right wing go away when millennials get older? So I'll just say, well, race is hugely important in the United States. It runs through everything. For instance, it also runs through what Wolfgang was saying about the difference between welfare and Social Security. Welfare also tends to be coded as help for people not only who are not deserving, but also people who are black or brown. Not always, but often. So there are the racial differences. So let me just say this about race. The younger generation is more racially diverse, and in fact, very soon will be a majority of color. Whites will be a minority. So that is a politically very important fact, because we will have a country that will be where the majority will be not white. But white millennials remain pretty much like older white people. So they, for example, still voted Republican in the last election. White men, young white men voted Republican. African American women voted 98% for Obama. So I think the next generation will be more progressive, not because the white people will change their mind, but because there will be fewer of them. Another issue that I can link two comments together is the unconventional participation, online, open government. So that's a huge topic, very important. I mean, I think one thing is, I think that Obama's open government stuff, his actual work, was very minor, very trivial. You know, so I think that the idea of participation, you're right, his thesis was, his official agenda was participation, transparency, and engagement, collaboration. And I think that does speak to contemporary values, and it does speak to young people. He didn't actually do anything. In fact, in some ways, what he's doing the last 3 days is fighting for more surveillance. But it is true that young people are the most likely to use the new forms of participation. In fact, and it also goes across social class. So poor young people use cell phones for communication too. I don't know whether that'll be a long-term generational effect or whether the older people will just catch up. But maybe that leads me to one last thing to say, unless anyone wants to push me in a particular way, which is, I think what Wolfgang said about the decline of big mediating organizations is just extremely important. So I do believe, and this actually, I can say something about your point too, because I think the real reason we have orientation to politics is because we belong to big groups that draw us in. And those big groups in the United States are weaker than they used to be, and the ones that are really weak are for working class people, because union membership is down to 8 or 10% of the population. One of the reasons African Americans still vote at a higher rate is because African American community still has some organizations, mainly churches. So my last thought is that I'm worried that the new electronic forms, despite sometimes going to large scale, which we also think, I think we saw in Spain with Los Indignados, don't have that capacity to bring people in and hold them. So sorry not to address everything else.
Thank you very much, Peter. Now we open a Q&A. Si alguien tiene alguna cuestión, o abrimos un turno de preguntas.
Spanish is fine.
Okay. No puede. Okay.
Hola, a ver. Me ha llamado la atención la pregunta es para Peter. Me ha llamado la atención que en el gráfico, si el gobierno debería hacer más y el gobierno no me escucha, en los millennials había una clara tendencia que la separaba de las otras generaciones. ¿A qué crees que se debe? Esa es la pregunta.
In the question about, in the survey question about wanting the government to do more? Yeah. Well, so this is actually related too to this question of are we moving left, which came up, I think, two of you asked it. And I do think the youngest voters moved the country somewhat left by voting for Obama and actually being to Obama's left in the last two election cycles. They did want more government. They wanted the healthcare reform. They wanted more of it. And it's starting to make a difference. So, and since 2004, we have seen more of a discourse about inequality, and some of it's driven by young people. So I think maybe it's important and meaningful. Two qualifications. One is that that is also partly because they're more racially and ethnically diverse. So if you just took the white men, young white men, not so much. They haven't changed as much. And the other thing is, I think they're trying to decide what to make of the last 6 years when they had a relatively progressive president. So to the question of, one of you asked, is 2004 the turn away from neoliberalism is the beginning of a change? We have one very important historical model, which is the Great Depression and Franklin Roosevelt. We had, almost no government, and then he came along and put in a lot of government, and that remained enduringly popular. The thing is, though, he succeeded politically. He had 4.5 terms. He was reelected. He got his agenda through. So a whole generation saw him as having succeeded. Obama gets elected and gets very little through Congress, achieves very little. Economy's pretty bad, negative growth in the first quarter. So I think that the question is, what will the young people conclude, in 10 or 20 years about this experiment? Will they conclude that they voted for a progressive politician because they did, and he failed, and therefore progressivism doesn't work? Or they voted for a progressive politician and he was beaten by bad Republicans, and they'll vote for a progressive again, or what? But I don't think they have decided. And I think it's too early to know.
¿Otra?
Muchas gracias por la presentación. Me gustaría, de los gráficos que presentaste, se concluye, como tú mismo haces, que no hay mayores efectos generacionales, ¿no es cierto? Pero por otra parte, al final de los comentarios mencionas que los votantes blancos en Estados Unidos siguen votando republicano. Entonces, es un interesante contraste, ¿no es cierto? Por una parte uno podría pensar que todo lo que se refiere a desafección en Estados Unidos hoy día no se ven efectos generacionales marcados, pero sí en términos de la perdurabilidad de las preferencias políticas, ¿no? Ahí es donde quizás están presentes este tipo de efectos. Planteo como una cuestión general.
Yeah.
Gracias.
Yes, thanks. So I think that you're exactly right. Race is still determining ideology very strongly. It's not changing that much by generation. But demographics are changing. So when I was a kid, white people in my generation were a pretty large majority of the population. By my children's period, they'll be a minority. So it almost doesn't matter whether those white people change their mind. They're going to be outvoted at some point. The other thing is, it's too crude to just talk about left and right. There are different issues. And I didn't talk deeply about issues here. But, for example, gay marriage and generally inclusion of sexual minorities, very powerfully generational. So those conservative white men who voted for Mitt Romney in 2012, they still favor gay marriage. So, so there are different issues. So on issues having to do with personal behavior, a lot of personal behavior issues having to do with immigration, actually. Young people are more favorable to immigration. But on issues having to do with taxing and spending money, young white people are still pretty conservative.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Another question?
Okay. Siguiendo con el hilo de mi anterior pregunta, ¿por qué crees que es el desplazamiento que dices que se está observando en los jóvenes hacia posiciones más progresistas? ¿Crees que puede ser debido a un cierre de expectativas? O sea, ¿crees que puede ser debido a que este modelo socioeconómico en el que vivimos se está viendo cerrado en la posibilidad de satisfacer necesidades? ¿Crees que tiene algo que ver, por ejemplo, un tema que he ido leyendo algo sobre, por ejemplo, las grandes deudas que adquieren los jóvenes para los estudios que luego no pueden ser pagadas una vez acabados los estudios, por eso están pidiendo más Estado, por eso están pidiendo redistribución? Es una crisis del modelo neoliberal que viene de Ronald Reagan. Y luego quería ver si crees que este giro hacia la izquierda sí o sí va a ser capitalizado por el Partido Demócrata, o hay algún tipo de posibilidad de que el sistema de partidos tradicional estadounidense se rompa por algún lado.
Well, briefly, I think I share your opinion about the failure of the neoliberal experiment. So I would be critical and I would vote for the left. The question is whether the young generation is feeling that same way and will continue to feel the same way. And there again, I think it depends on what they conclude about how good a job the Democrats can do for them. So I think this happened once before, as I said, in the 1930s, and that whole generation permanently decided that the government should be more active. But it was because they also thought the government was successful. And so this is the question. So I think in brief, I think the neoliberal model was seen as a failure. George Bush was extremely unpopular among young voters. The question is whether Obama represents a positive change or a disappointment. Looking immediately into the future, we have an extraordinary situation where Hillary Clinton dominates the Democratic Party in a way that we haven't seen anyone dominate. So we know what we get in the short term, which is very mildly center-left. And so, that may turn out to be, I think young people will vote for her on the whole. That may turn out to be successful or not. I think the prospects for a further left are blocked by Hillary Clinton for now. The scenario where I see a further left coming up in America is one in which she wins the nomination, runs against a Republican, and is defeated in 2016. And so then in 2020, you see a more progressive Democrat. There are more progressive Democrats running, as you may know, but they're going to lose.
Sí, me ha impresionado mucho el gráfico en el que se veía cómo generación tras generación la lectura de periódicos ha disminuido drásticamente en Estados Unidos, hasta el punto que la última generación, la más reciente, los millennials, solo leían, un 8% de ellos leía la prensa a diario, si lo he entendido bien, ¿no? A diario. Entonces, bueno, esto me parece quizá lo más impresionante de lo que he oído de tu intervención. Me gustaría saber si hay algún tipo de estudio sobre el nivel de conocimiento de la realidad local, internacional, doméstica, nacional, por parte de los jóvenes. Es decir, Porque mucha gente piensa que, bueno, puedes dejar de leer el periódico, pero eso no importa, porque estás en Internet, recibes noticias continuamente a través de miles de canales, estás informado y tal, ¿no? Pero a mí eso me parece completamente falso. Quiero decir, no creo que muchas personas sean capaces de sustituir el volumen de información y de capacitación política que te daba leer el periódico por el acceso a fuentes de Internet, en fin, sin discriminar probablemente, ¿no? Bueno, me gustaría saber, entonces, esto sí me parece un dato muy grave, ¿no? Porque sí indicaría una incapacidad de esta nueva generación para entender lo que se juega en la política y, por tanto, para tomar decisiones racionales y motivadas sobre este asunto. Y por eso quería saber si hay algún estudio sobre el nivel de información que tienen los jóvenes respecto a, en fin, a lo que ocurre a su alrededor, ¿no? Gracias.
We do some surveying actually of young people, and generally knowledge is bad, but it's not so much a generation effect, because knowledge of older people is also bad. But I think thank you for raising that point. I mean, Wolfgang already pointed out two problems with so the young people do consume news. I mean, they are on the phone getting news. They're not reading the daily newspaper. So one problem with that is, and there are some good things about that, but one problem with it is quality control. Another problem is tremendous choice, allowing you to only read things that you're interested in. So you only read the political views you agree with, or you choose not. You say, I'm not interested in politics, and you have nothing to do with it. But there's actually a third problem, which I would just add to Wolfgang's list, which is the paying for the collection of news. The hiring of journalists. So 30% fewer people work as paid journalists in the United States today as 10 years ago. So they're simply not paying for the news. And that I say that as an answer to your question, because I think the form of knowledge that is most missing is actually about local and state politics. And it's not because people are stupid or uninterested, it's because nobody's covering it. So there are actually still plenty of national and international news, because that can be produced by 6 or 7 agencies, right? So everybody can get the New York Times, wonderful. But my town, my city has a terrible newspaper now. It's almost bankrupt. And so nobody's covering my mayor's office. And so I am ignorant about my mayor. And it's not about what's in my head, it's about the business model. So, and I do think this is one case where the future, where Tocqueville and Marx probably are right, and you foresee the future of the European industry, unless there's something I don't understand. I mean, I might be wrong, but I think you're in trouble.
Just an additional question going back to Obama. Some of your trends show, so to say, just before and with Obama, and interest in politics and so forth. But the major judgment about these 8 Obama years is he failed. He failed especially against the high expectations. And the media are transporting such an opinion about Obama. And if you connect this and certain disencanto, disaffection with Obama, with somebody who is anchored deeply, like Hillary Clinton, into traditional politics, then this can only confirm, strengthen this disaffection effect from the young people. The young people did vote for Obama, not so much because of certain policy. It was a new style of governing and a new style of politics. Now, it obviously did not bear the fruits many are expected, and now Hillary comes along. So this could mean a swinging back of the millennials back to non-political behavior. Is it such a risky...
I think that's well said, and I'll just say I worry about it too. The only thing that Hillary Clinton has is gender. There's some excitement about a woman. But I think that's I don't think that's the same as what happened in 2008. 2008 was an idea that politics would be different. Because we could say podemos, right? I mean, it was yes, we can. I mean, it was or si se puede.
Okay, thank you very much.